Hungary never believed 8 gun noses on a B-25 could rip warships to pieces. But out over the Pacific, steel decks shredded, gun crews vanished behind sparks and smoke, and convoys died in minutes. The Mitchell was supposed to be a medium bomber. That day, it was a sea-level executioner. Now picture why no one saw it coming. They expected altitudes and arcs, tidy bomb runs and long warnings. Instead, the ocean began to hiss. A squadron skimmed the waves at mast height, spray feathering off propeller tips, noses jammed with Browning 50s. 8 blazing mouths per plane, 8 rivers of fire climbing a freighter's flank, chewing into drums and crates until the deck blew open like a furnace door. That was the moment imagination beat doctrine. Because before those runs, the balance looked hopeless. Japanese cruisers and destroyers guarded lifelines that fed island fortresses. High flyers missed, dive bombers bled, and every ship that slipped through meant tougher beaches, deeper bunkers, and more names folded into letters home. The Mitchell was solid, yes, but solid did not stop convoys. So someone made it mean. Glass noses came off, gun mounts went in, ammunition boxes crowded the crawlways. A bomber that once waited for a bomb site's calm crosshairs now lived at eye level with whitecaps, where a heartbeat too long could end in spray and silence. And here is the promise we are chasing in this story. How a plane built to punch holes in factories learned to punch holes in ships, and how that shift cracked an aura of invincibility. By early 1942, the Pacific looked like a long, dark hallway with the door slammed shut. Guam gone, Wake gone, the Philippines burning. Japanese destroyers prowled like knife blades in moonlight, herding transports that never seemed to miss a date. High-altitude bombs fell wide. The few that hit did not stop steam whistles or turn propellers silent. Crews climbed down from battered Mitchells, counted the empty spots on the flight line, and understood the math was against them. So the talk changed. Not about courage, about method. If precision from above could not break a convoy, then precision had to move down where steel met water, down where gun crews blinked salt from their eyes and could be blinded by sparks. The Mitchell had the legs to reach the convoys and the bones to take a beating. What it lacked were teeth in the right place. In the heat of Australia's airfields, the experiment began. Nose glass off, sheet metal drilled, brackets welded, Browning 50s slotted side by side until the front of the bomber looked like a black comb of barrels. Ammunition cans sat like anvils. Cables snaked to triggers. The plane pitched nose heavy on its gear as if eager to bite. The first tests felt like holding onto a charging animal. Pilots leveled at practice hulks, squeezed, and the airframe thundered. Tracers walked across rust, punching splinters of steel free. Recoil shoved the bomber back, but the wings held and the engines pulled true. Problems snapped at their heels. Jams, overheating, sightlines that drifted under recoil. Each flaw met another midnight fix, another length of hose, another shim of metal. Word spread in mess tents in the careful way hope spreads. Maybe this was not just a stunt. Maybe decks could be emptied before the first bomb skipped. Maybe the ocean would stop belonging to the other side. When the first gun-nosed Mitchells rolled onto jungle runways in New Guinea, they looked ungainly, snouts bristling with barrels, ammunition crammed where glass once gleamed. Even ground crews cracked jokes. "That thing looks more like a porcupine than a bomber." But the laughter thinned when the engines roared and the heavy planes actually lifted into the humid sky. Their orders weren't glamorous, not battleships, not cruisers, just supply barges, floating arteries feeding Japanese strongholds. If these planes could not shred barges, no one would ever trust them against destroyers. The formations skimmed the ocean, 100 feet, sometimes less. Pilots clenched sticks so tightly the leather creaked. From that low, every wave looked like a wall. Crews peered forward through vibrating barrels, waiting for the first sight of hulls. Then they appeared, dark specks, bigger with every heartbeat. The lead Mitchell lined up and fired. 8 streams of orange tore across the water, biting into a freighter's bow. The deck leapt with sparks. Men scattered, some leaping for cover, others cut down before their guns could even traverse. Then came the thunder, explosions of fuel drums, ammunition cooking off, plumes of fire spreading across the surface. It was too fast for Japanese gunners. They fired wildly, shells splashing behind already vanished planes. Still, the results spread faster than grief. Reports read like impossibilities. Medium bombers gutting ships. At last, a weapon that forced the Japanese Navy to look over its shoulder. March 3, 1943. The Pacific morning broke over the Bismarck Sea, where a Japanese convoy steamed hard toward Leh. 8 transports guarded by destroyers carrying thousands of troops. If they landed, New Guinea's defenses would stiffen. If they died at sea, the balance might tilt. From the airstrips at Port Moresby and Dobodura, Allied planes lifted into the humid sky. Among them, Mitchells with noses that looked like snarling beasts. Pilots paced before takeoff, running hands along the riveted steel, muttering prayers. Ground crews stuffed belts of ammunition until their palms bled. When the order came, engines growled to life, and the gunship swung out low across the jungle canopy. At 10 a.m., the convoy came into view, black shapes cutting through the water, anti-aircraft guns already bristling. Lookouts raised alarms, and within moments the sky above the fleet erupted with black blossoms of flak. But the Mitchells didn't climb. They dropped lower, hugging the surface until spray streaked their fuselages. Then the 8 gun noses opened up. Tracer fire tore across the bows, walking into bridges, shredding gun crews before they could steady their aim. One Mitchell charged directly at a destroyer, rounds hammering into its bow, sending men tumbling from their posts. Others strafed transports stem to stern, smashing lifeboats, igniting stacked fuel. Behind them, waves of bomb-laden Mitchells skipped their payloads across the waves, bouncing into hulls and detonating with brutal finality. Explosions rocked the convoy. One transport heaved skyward before flames consumed it. Another rolled and capsized, men spilling into oil-slick water. Destroyers staggered, their guns silenced, smoke pouring from shattered superstructures. But the price was steep. Flak bursts punched holes through Mitchell wings. One lost its engine and cartwheeled into the sea. Fighters screamed in from above, forcing tail gunners to fire blind as their pilots stayed locked on course. It was chaos. Steel, fire, and salt spray all colliding in a single hour. By the afternoon, the convoy was annihilated. 8 transports gone. 4 destroyers sunk. Over 3,000 troops lost beneath the waves. For the first time, Japanese commanders saw their lifelines severed by medium bombers flying like predators at sea level. The wreckage of the Bismarck Sea smoldered long after the last Allied planes returned to base. Smoke pillars stretched across the horizon like black tombstones. Survivors clung to debris, watching as sharks closed in. To the Japanese sailors who lived through it, the memory was branded into their minds. Bombers weren't supposed to come this low, weren't supposed to strafe with such fury, but the Mitchells had. Back in Tokyo, commanders studied reports with disbelief. One rescued captain muttered, "They came like torpedoes with wings." Our men had no chance. Another officer admitted bitterly, "We thought them clumsy." Instead, they were like wolves. Fear crept in where confidence once reigned. Convoys that had once steamed proudly now hugged coastlines, sailed only at night, or hid under smoke screens. Orders demanded tighter formations, more escorts, and disciplined gun crews. Fighter squadrons were reassigned to patrol convoy routes with urgency. The Imperial Navy wasn't beaten, but it was shaken, and yet rumors outran orders. Japanese sailors whispered about the porcupine bombers, claiming they were armored monsters impervious to bullets. Reality was harsher. The Mitchells were as fragile as ever, their engines vulnerable, their skins thin. But psychology mattered as much as steel. When men hesitated at their guns, when dread dulled their reaction time, the advantage was already lost. American intelligence caught wind of this fear. Prisoner interrogations revealed a common refrain. When we saw them so low, I felt already dead. The Allies had found more than a tactic. They'd found a psychological weapon that bled the Japanese Navy before the first shot was fired. But the danger was far from over. By late 1943, Japanese flak grew heavier, fighter cover thicker. Each raid was a race against evolving defenses. Mitchell crews came back more often with wings shredded, tails half gone, or friends missing. For every victory at sea, the cost climbed higher. For all the shockwaves the Mitchells sent through Japanese ranks, the men inside them paid the price in nerves and blood. Pilots who once dreamed of clear skies now lived at sea level, staring at waves that looked close enough to touch. One young lieutenant later admitted, it wasn't flying. It was charging headfirst into hell and praying you came out the other side. In the nose, gunners felt every vibration, tracers spit forward, barrels rattling until their arms ached. Enemy fire whipped past so close it singed hair and cloth. If you thought you froze, one gunner recalled, and if you froze, you were dead. Behind them, mechanics bore a quieter burden. They didn't fly the missions, but every weld, every bolt, and every bent steel mount meant life or death. Sergeant Bill Hardy wrote home, "We don't have proper parts. Half the time, we hammer scrap into shape and call it armor. I joke we're holding these planes together with spit and sweat. But when they come back full of holes and still flying, I know we did our job." Humor became armor too. Crews painted shark teeth on noses, scrawled Jap Buster across fuselages, dared the enemy to face them. They laughed at the edge of the runway, laughter that always carried a hint of desperation. When missions ended, men lit cigarettes with trembling hands, the sound of engines still roaring in their skulls. But loss was never far. When a Mitchell didn't return, silence spread across camp like a fog. Empty bunks, quiet mess tents, laughter that never came back. Frank Dillard, known for a booming laugh that lifted spirits, vanished on a raid near Wewak. The silence afterward cut deeper than flak. Still, they strapped in again the next day. Not because fear vanished, but because they'd learned to live with it. What drove them wasn't just survival. It was belief. Every ship they burned meant fewer Japanese soldiers in the jungles, fewer American graves on distant beaches. After the Bismarck Sea, the Mitchells' role was no longer a gamble, it was doctrine. What had begun as Pappy Gunn's audacious experiment became a cornerstone of Allied strategy. Squadrons across the Southwest Pacific received gun-nosed Mitchells, and tactics hardened into a rhythm of violence. First wave strafed, second wave skip-bombed, third wave circled to mop up survivors. Off the coast of New Guinea in mid-1943, that rhythm hit like a drumbeat. A Japanese convoy crept through narrow waters, escorted by destroyers. Instead of staying high and predictable, the Mitchells came in packs, ripping decks apart before gun crews could even lift their sights. Observers later said it looked like wolves dismantling prey piece by piece. In minutes, the sea was burning. Word spread fast. Japanese sailors whispered about ship-killer squadrons. Convoy commanders grew hesitant, refusing to sail by day, hugging coastlines, or waiting for cover of storm and night. The once predatory Imperial Navy was learning the taste of fear. By late 1944, the war's center of gravity shifted to the Philippines. General Douglas MacArthur's promise to return hinged on choking off Japan's ability to reinforce its garrisons. The Mitchells became executioners in that campaign. From Leyte and Mindoro, they hunted shipping in the Sibuyan Sea, the Sulu Sea, and along Luzon's coast. Geography was treacherous, tight bays, sudden squalls, reefs hidden like knives. But the tactics never changed. Come low, guns blazing, bombs skipping into hulls. One raid near Ormoc Bay in late 1944 became legend. Japanese reinforcements rushed toward shore, only to be caught by waves of Mitchells. Pilots strafed relentlessly, gunners shredded decks, and bombs cracked ships open until debris rained across the sea. Survivors leapt overboard, but even the water wasn't safety. Machine guns cut through lifeboats as the gunships roared past. Grim, merciless, but effective, the reinforcements never reached shore. For crews, the Philippines were a marathon of exhaustion. Sweat-soaked flight suits before takeoff, salt-crusted skin after hours over the ocean. Missions came daily, losses mounted, but the results were undeniable. Convoys starved, Japanese garrisons crumbled, and the Allies pushed closer to Tokyo's doorstep. The Japanese Navy did not simply roll over after the Bismarck Sea. Convoys were their lifeblood, and survival demanded adaptation. Orders poured down the chain: sail at night, hug coastlines, lay smoke screens thick enough to blind strafers. Anti-aircraft drills became relentless, officers barking until their men fired sooner, saturating the air with shells before Mitchells could align. And they brought in the fighters. Zeros, fast and deadly, began sweeping convoy routes like hawks. Their mission was simple: catch the lumbering Mitchells before they dropped to mast height. By late 1943, Mitchell squadrons flying into Wewak's waters often found themselves swarmed. One bomber exploded mid-air, scattering debris across the surf. Another limped home with its nose torn apart, gunners dead at their posts. The victories were real, but the cost in men and machines gnawed deeper every month. For the Mitchell crews, every sortie was now a duel of wits and a nerve. Anti-aircraft fire grew heavier, converging in disciplined sheets instead of random bursts. Fighter escorts waited in ambush, yet the gunships still pressed low, forcing Japanese gunners to split their attention between sky and sea. It became a chess match, Japan adjusting formations, the Allies adjusting attack waves. But fear still haunted Japanese decks. Intelligence from captured prisoners revealed how sailors whispered about the porcupine bombers, convinced they were armored demons. In truth, Mitchells were fragile, thin-skinned, engines vulnerable, but perception mattered. Hesitation at a gun station meant seconds lost, and seconds were death when 8 streams of tracers came roaring across the water. American crews felt the shift too. The thrill of early victories gave way to sober calculation. Losses mounted. Yet every convoy they shredded meant fewer bullets waiting in the jungle, fewer soldiers dug in on beaches. One pilot summed it up: "Every ship we burn here is 100 lives saved there." Every battle report listed ships sunk, tonnage destroyed, convoys annihilated. But behind the numbers were faces, kids barely out of their teens, strapped into vibrating cockpits with no guarantee of coming home. For them, Courage wasn't a grand speech or a heroic pose. It was gripping the controls with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. It was climbing into a nose bristling with guns, knowing you might never climb out again. One pilot, Lieutenant Jack Kramer, recalled his first low-level run. The ocean looked like glass, but it felt alive. I could see the bow of the ship getting bigger, closer. My hands cramped on the stick. Then I pulled the trigger and the nose lit up. The whole plane shook like it was about to tear apart. Gunners lived their own private hell. From their positions, tracers streaked past like burning spears, each one a reminder that death was inches away. "You didn't think," one gunner said, "if you thought you froze. If you froze, you died, so you just fired and hoped it was enough." Mechanics carried a quieter weight. They worked by lanterns deep into the night, mosquitoes buzzing in the humid air, scavenging parts, welding steel plates by hand. Sergeant Bill Hardy wrote, "We joked we were holding these planes together with spit and hope. But when they came back full of holes and still flying, we knew our work mattered. That bond was unbreakable. Pilots trusted mechanics. Gunners trusted pilots. Everyone trusted each other because trust was survival. When a crew was lost, the silence afterward was suffocating. Empty bunks. Jokes that no one made anymore. One gunner said of a fallen friend, "We all pretended we'd be the lucky ones. When he didn't come back, we knew none of us were untouchable." Yet the very next morning, they flew again, not because fear was gone, but because belief carried them. Every ship burned meant fewer soldiers waiting in ambush, fewer graves dug on jungle slopes. It turned to the Philippines depended on cutting Japanese supply lines. Every ton of ammunition, every battalion of reinforcements sailing into Leyte threatened to choke the Allied advance. That's where the Mitchells came in, flying daily, their 8-gun noses now a familiar terror to friend and foe alike. Ormoc Bay became their crucible. Japanese troop convoys steamed desperately toward Leyte, knowing defeat on shore meant the Philippines would slip away. The bay was narrow, hemmed by ridges, thick with anti-aircraft batteries. Still, the Mitchells went in low, waves slapping at their bellies. The first wave strafed decks clean. Gun crews fell before they could return fire. The second wave dropped fragmentation bombs in skipping arcs, explosions rolling ships sideways. The third wave circled back, hammering survivors and smashing anything left afloat. One transport exploded so violently that debris rained down across the sea like steel shrapnel. Another capsized, men leaping overboard only to face gunfire as the Mitchells screamed past again. The raid was merciless but effective. Reinforcements never reached the beaches. Allied infantry dug in at Leyte felt the difference immediately. Less artillery, fewer waves of counterattacks, weaker resistance. What the Mitchells destroyed at sea saved countless lives ashore. But the work was grinding. Crews flew almost daily, exhaustion painting dark lines under their eyes. The heat of the Philippines seeped into every mission, sweat-soaked uniforms, salt crust on skin, the roar of engines pounding skulls long after wheels touched down. Some planes returned riddled with holes. Others never came back at all. Yet the squadrons pressed on because momentum was shifting, and they knew it. By early 1945, the Japanese Navy was starving. Convoys became rare, not because they weren't needed, but because they couldn't survive. Out in the Sibuyan and Sulu Seas, Mitchells turned supply routes into graveyards. Garrisons on islands withered, undersupplied, isolated. The invincible navy that had once swept across the Pacific was now bleeding out, one burning transport at a time. By the time 1945 dawned, the Pacific's seas were littered with wreckage. Japanese transports gutted, destroyers sunk. oil slicks stretching across miles of blue water. Much of that devastation carried the fingerprint of the B-25 Mitchell, reborn from a reliable medium bomber into a predator no admiral had foreseen. The lesson was bigger than tonnage sunk. It was proof that adaptation, born of desperation, could tilt an entire theater of war. The Mitchells had not been designed for this fight. They were supposed to drop bombs from medium altitude, steady and predictable. But men like Paul "Pappy" Gunn refused to accept doctrine's limits. Mechanics stripped glass noses, bolted on machine guns, and rewrote the rules of aerial warfare with sparks and sweat. Courage made those modifications matter. Flying mast height wasn't daring. It was terrifying. Pilots skimmed waves so close the spray stung their eyes. Gunners fired until their arms went numb. Mechanics patched planes with scavenged steel and prayers. Their courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting in spite of it. Unity sealed the deal. A Mitchell was never a one-man show. Every mission depended on a chain of effort, mechanics hammering through the night, armorers jamming belts of ammunition into place, navigators charting courses, pilots threading the waves, gunners holding their ground in vibrating turrets. Each link mattered, and when one broke, lives were lost. But humility shadowed every success. For every convoy destroyed, some Mitchells didn't return. Empty bunks, folded flags, laughter that never came back. Veterans who survived carried scars deep into old age. Some spoke freely at reunions, voices cracking as they described the thunder of tracers and the smell of burning ships. Others never spoke at all, their silence carrying memories too heavy to share. The Mitchells proved something that stretched beyond war. Innovation thrives when men are cornered, when old methods fail, and when survival demands courage to break rules. The 8-gun nose was never drawn on neat blueprints. It was hammered together on the margins, tested in fire, and carried into history by kids who barely knew how to shave. When the war finally closed in 1945, Japan's empire lay fractured, its navy a shadow of its former power. For the Imperial Navy, the bitterest memory wasn't just the loss of battleships and carriers, it was the humiliation of seeing convoys shattered by a bomber they had dismissed as clumsy. Survivors spoke of nightmares, the roar of engines skimming the waves, the flash of tracers slashing decks, the sudden firestorms that left no time to fight back. For the Americans, the Mitchells' transformation became a symbol of resilience. It wasn't the largest plane, nor the most advanced, but it proved a principle that outlived the war. When conventional methods fail, creativity and courage can carve a new path. Later aircraft, from gunships in Vietnam to modern close support planes, carried the DNA of those improvised B-25s. The men themselves carried heavier legacies. Many came home with medals, but also with scars. Nightmares of tracer fire, the faces of lost friends, the ringing echo of engines that never faded. At reunions decades later, old pilots and gunners laughed, swapped stories, and sometimes fell silent when a name was spoken. One veteran said simply, "We weren't heroes. We were scared kids doing what had to be done. The heroes were the ones who didn't come back." And that's the heart of the Mitchell story. Beyond tactics, beyond technology, it's about ordinary men who refuse to give up. Mechanics in jungle workshops, gunners with shaking hands, pilots who skimmed the sea like arrows. Together they turned desperation into innovation and changed the tide of a war. Today, when visitors walk through aviation museums and stop before a preserved Mitchell, they often see just a machine, a medium bomber with clean lines and rugged steel. But to those who know its story, it represents something far greater. It's the reminder that even when the odds are stacked, when the enemy seems untouchable, ingenuity and grit can flip the script. The 8-gun nose wasn't born from blueprints or strategy rooms. It was born from sweat, from midnight welding, from the refusal to accept defeat. Against one of the most feared navies in the world, it turned hunters into prey. And in doing so, it carried with it lessons that stretch beyond battlefields, that change comes when rules are broken, that courage is choosing action despite fear, and that unity is forged when survival demands it. For the Japanese who faced it, the memory never faded. The shock of seeing a clumsy bomber become a predator still haunts survivor accounts. For the Americans who flew it, the memory was heavier still. The friends who never came back, the empty bunks, the laughter that died in the Pacific sky. Yet their story lives on. The Mitchells weren't just ship killers. They were proof that resilience, innovation, and sheer will can reshape history. And that's why we tell it. Because history isn't just names in books or numbers on charts, it's lessons in blood and fire that still matter today. The B-25 gunship reminds us that no obstacle is permanent, no enemy untouchable, when ordinary people dare to adapt. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more untold chapters of history, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think was the most daring innovation of the Pacific War? We'd love to hear it. Thanks for watching, and until next time, remember, even in the darkest times, there's always a way forward.